He wrote the title track to the best-selling album of 1970, 1971, and 1972 as half of one of the biggest groups of the rock era. When the duo broke up, he embarked on a very successful solo career that burned hot through the 70s. But by the early 80s, his star had cooled, and he dug deep within his artistic soul for inspiration that took him to a faraway continent. The album that re-energized his career became one of the most acclaimed of the decade, and one of the most controversial. Coming up, the story of the lead single that came from someone calling this legend the wrong name twice at a dinner party. Really funny story. The song actually failed until he created one of the funniest music videos ever. Stories coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you ever saved up UPC symbols from a cereal box to send away for a prize, you're going to dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Make sure that you subscribe below right now, click the big red button, click the bell so you always know when our interviews are coming out. I know you'll find something you'll love on this channel. We also have a Patreon. You're going to want to check that out. We're putting full interviews there. You'll also find additional exclusive content. You can even become an honorary producer to help us curate this music history.
Asking only workmen's wages, I come looking for a job.
So in 1970, Simon and Garfunkel's final album, Bridge Over Troubled Water, was massive. It was the best-selling album of the year, and when the duo officially broke up, the same year, the popularity of the record, it just got bigger. It continued to top the album charts to end up as the best-selling LP of 71 and 72 in the United States and 10 other countries around the world. Actually, at the end of 1972, Bridge Over Troubled Water was the best-selling album of all time, and it held that position for a while. While their swan song controlled the album chart, Art Garfunkel and Paul Simon, they went their separate ways, and they embarked on solo careers. Now, Art Garfunkel had 6 hit singles over the 10 years that followed, but Paul Simon, he vaulted into solo superstardom with 9 pop hits, including the platinum mega smash, 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. That one reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and held that position for 3 weeks in 1976.
You just slip out the back, Jack, make a new plan, Stan.
Now, in 1980, Paul scored 2 top 40 hits from the One Trick Pony album. That was released as a motion picture soundtrack. It's actually a film that Paul starred in, and is Paul's 5th studio album. There was Late in the Evening. That one climbed to number 6 in America and number 9 in the UK.
When it's late in the evening, and the music
and the gritty streetwise title cut One Trick Pony that peaked at number 40 on the Billboard Pop chart.
He does one trick only. It's the principal sauce.
But by the mid-80s, Paul's career had cooled considerably, and he craved an artistic revitalization, and not so much for the commercial aspect, but for his internal joy of artistic fulfillment. Paul had already composed one of the most powerfully emotive songs ever written with Bridge Over Troubled Water, for which he shared the spotlight with Art Garfunkel. But what he wanted in 1985 was to compose his opus as a solo artist. It became a sojourn that took him to South Africa at the ugly height of forced racial segregation, was known as apartheid. At this time, Paul's marriage to actress Carrie Fisher had fallen apart, and then his 6th studio album, Hearts and Bones, came out in, I think, 1983. It was his worst seller as a solo artist. It was a pretty dark period that Paul described as a personal blow, a career setback, and the combination of colliding storms put him really in a tailspin, as he would say. By traveling to South Africa to make a record, Paul Simon did so under very dangerous conditions, and he went against the United Nations imposed cultural boycott against apartheid that was in effect since 1980. The UN boycott admonished states to prevent all cultural, academic, sporting, and other exchanges with South Africa. There's actually specific languages ordering writers, artists, musicians, and other personalities to refrain from doing anything in South Africa. Paul Simon knew that if he went to South Africa, he was going to be heavily criticized by his fellow musicians and, of course, by the press. But he was not going down there to make a record for the government or to perform concerts, none of those things. He was following a strong musical instinct within his soul to work with artists whose music he'd greatly admired. Paul's resolve led to the multicultural masterpiece, Graceland. Now, the lead single from Graceland was a fun-loving song about a man going through a bit of a midlife crisis. A very clever wordplay and a snappy rhythmic melody. Of course, the song's called You Can Call Me Al. The title of Paul's tune, it's actually based on a really funny incident that happened to Paul and his then-wife Peggy Harper back in 1970. So picture this. One evening back in 1970, while he was riding the high of having the biggest album in the world, Paul and his wife Peggy were invited to a party by their friend composer Stanley Silverman. So this party, it was hosted by the conductor of the New York Philharmonic, a French composer named Pierre Boulez, at his residence in Manhattan. Now, when Paul and Peggy showed up at the door of Pierre's apartment, and they introduced themselves to this host, he turned to his other guests in his apartment. He said, "Meet Al and Betty." It was obvious that Pierre had no clue, no idea who this couple was. As the couple were leaving the get-together, and saying their goodbyes to everybody, Pierre did it again. He said, "Thank you, Al, and give my best to Betty." Instead of, copping an attitude and feeling dissed about this, Paul just laughed about it. He chalked it up to an innocent misinterpretation of their names. Paul and Peggy joked about it for months after. Called each other Al and Betty for a while after that. 15 years later, Paul turned Pierre Boulez's faux pas into a funny, iconic pop chorus.
I can call you Betty, Betty, when you call me, you can call me Al.
Now, the development of the song, You Can Call Me Al, that originated in Johannesburg, where Paul teamed up with local musicians to experiment with African sounds. Paul had a really great time with a lot of different artists. He especially enjoyed working with Stimula. That was a local group named after a life-changing train ride. The main melodic riff of You Can Call Me Al, that was invented by the lead guitarist of Stimula, the band's founder, Ray Just Now Fury. Fury, who passed away from lung cancer in 2017, he came up with the riff during one of their studio jam sessions. The recorded music tracks, they were recorded on a demo and later edited together in New York City by producer Roy Halley. There's so many unique scatterlings that make You Can Call Me Al come alive the way the African bush comes alive with sounds of nocturnal wildlife. I have to admit, I borrowed scatterlings from Johnny Clegg and Sipho Makunu's band Jaluka, just like Paul Simon did in his third verse of You Can Call Me Al. It's such a cool word that means vagrants. From start to finish, You Can Call Me Al, it's like a safari of a musical invention.
They are the scatterlings of Africa. Each of sound, cattle in the marketplace, scatterlings and orphanages.
As we continue to break down this unique song, I want to thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear, the glasses I always wear. With Zenni, it's really simple. You can design your own frames. You choose the color, the shape, and the design, and you can do a virtual try-on right then and there, and you have them delivered right to your door. You have the ability to add amazing features like blue blocks, protect your eyes from digital blue light. You can also add sunglasses. Make sure to click right up here on our link to get up to 80% off regular retail prices. It's our special PR deal.
He looks around, he sees angels in the architect.
So the intro for You Can Call Me Al, that was built around Ray Furry's melody by the genius of Adrian Belew. That was on a guitar synthesizer. There's a heavy horn section of 8 brass instruments and a bass sax on You Can Call Me Al, arranged and conducted by Rob Mounsey. But what very few people realize is that the intro of the track was actually a simulated saxophone sound that was performed by Belew on a guitar synthesizer. It wasn't on an actual sax. Belew had a variety of saxophone emulations, from baritone to alto. They all sound real, but with a different kind of quirky quality to them. Paul wrote out every single part exactly as he wanted them for the famous intro, and Belew played around with his unorthodox equipment until he nailed what Paul was listening for exactly. The real saxophone parts on You Can Call Me Al were added later in the song, performed by Ronnie Kuber. The trombone sections were delivered by the duo of Dave Bagaran and Kim Allen Sissel, while the trumpets were played by the quartet of Randy Brecker, John Faddis, Alan Rubin, and Lou Soloff. One of the most unique parts of the musical arrangement for You Can Call Me Al is the use of the penny whistle. The penny whistle solo in the bridge was played by Morris Goldberg, who was a musician from South Africa that was living in New York City. And what about Bakiti Kumula with the bass at the end of the bridge? You know what? That wasn't actually part of the original arrangement. Paul actually recommended they add a bass break, mainly because I guess it was Bakiti's birthday, and he thought it would be a little birthday present for his bassist friend. Bakiti enthusiastically executed a speedy bass break with no frets, completely off script. It was totally improvised. That funky groove is palindromic, since only the first half was recorded, then it was played backwards for the second half of the recording. Reversing the recording was the masterstroke of Paul's longtime engineer Roy Halley, who came up with the idea in an effort to make the song even more interesting. The abstract sonic imagery of You Can Call Me Al, it surrounds Paul's quick-paced, nonsensical self-examination of a man contemplating where his life's journey has taken him. He sings with wonder about why he's getting soft in the middle now, why the rest of his life is so hard, and pondering the loss of his wife and family and finding a new role model.
Who'll be my role model now that my role model is gone?
Paul, he's one of the most underrated lyricists of the entire rock era. He absolutely should be ranked in the top 10, if not higher. I don't know very many artists that have the ability to write a poetically complex lyric like, I want a shot at redemption, don't want to end up a cartoon in a cartoon graveyard, and then deliver it as a jovial conversation instead of an analogy of depression.
I want a shot at redemption, don't want to end up a cartoon in a cartoon graveyard.
Before Paul launched into the creation of Graceland, he participated with the Galaxy of Legends that sang on We Are the World by USA for Africa. We just covered that about a month ago. Now, during those sessions, he actually sought the wisdom of Quincy Jones and Harry Belafonte. He wanted to get their gut feelings on his aspirations to go out to South Africa to do this album. Quincy was the impresario of the We Are the World sessions, of course, and Harry was one of the superstar vocalists. Quincy, he encouraged Paul to go, but Harry Belafonte, he had mixed feelings about it. Now, to help him make the right decision, Harry advised Paul to consult with the African National Congress and ask for their blessing. And the ANC, if Paul met with him, he clearly did not heed their advice, and he went ahead with his plan to record in South Africa, risking the inevitable ire and outrage of his peers. In a showing of solidarity, many notable musicians, including some of the world's biggest icons like Bono, Bob Dylan, and Bruce Springsteen, were outspoken members of the Artists Against Apartheid that was established in 1985. I mean, not only did the organization unite against the government of South Africa, they all refused to perform there. Artists Against Apartheid recorded songs about snubbing offers to play lucrative gigs at the infamous venue Sun City. Recording in South Africa, that was a violation of the UN boycott, and many black leaders in that country were critical, very critical of Paul Simon's decision to do that. They believed that it was a setback for their crusade. Now, some of Paul's peers criticized him for not addressing apartheid in any of his lyrics on the album. But Paul Simon, he was perplexed. He asked the question, was I supposed to solve a serious social issue in a song? Paul was honest with himself and his detractors. He felt he wasn't really good at writing protest songs, especially in the vein of Bob Dylan, or Neil Young, or Sir Bob Geldof. Paul's intentions, they were purely based on artistic expression and showcasing the spiritual richness of African music for the rest of the world to discover and appreciate. In fact, he called Graceland its own political statement, believing that the music with heavy African influences that would resonate with the audience as much as a protest song. He felt that when one hears the tracks on Graceland, they may be compelled to find out what's really happening to the people of Africa and in turn explore ways to join the crusade to help them.
Call me out, call me out.
Now, over his career, Paul Simon consistently incorporated multicultural styles into his music. I mean, take his first solo single after the Simon and Garfunkel breakup, Mother and Child Reunion, for example. That song was recorded in Jamaica, heavily influenced by the sounds of the Caribbean.
The mother and child reunion is on.
And then Paul's second single from his solo debut, the Brazilian-influenced Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard. That was another one.
See me and Julio down by the schoolyard.
And actually, remember the Colombian-flavored El Condor Pasa? That was one that Paul arranged into an international pop hit in the late 60s from the Bridge Over Troubled Water LP.
If I could, I surely would.
And then the Southern gospel collaboration with the Dixie Hummingbirds on his 1973 hit, Loves Me Like a Rock. That one was from There Goes Rhymin' Simon. Paul shared that he found the Graceland recording sessions in Johannesburg euphoric, though there was palpable tension below the surface because of apartheid. There were moments of sheer joy that by the end of a long session would turn into terror. Paul recalled how the musicians that were working with him in the studio, they became anxious if the studio session stretched into the evening hours, since they were prohibited by government law from using public transportation or even being on the streets after dark. Now, at the completion of his 2-week stint in South Africa, Paul, he was revitalized personally and professionally. He had really rekindled his passion for music with this album. Ultimately, he and his potpourri of talent made a record with an eclectic mix of pop, zydeco, rock, and imaganga, or township jive. That originated as the street music of Soweto, South Africa.
Days of miracle and wonder. This is the long distance.
While the music was being captured, Paul struggled to define the theme of this bold endeavor. The initial title of the album was actually Driving Through Wasteland. Then he changed it to Going to Graceland, a reference to Elvis's estate in Memphis. Paul Simon believed Graceland represented a spiritual direction, similar to what he experienced on his trip to South Africa. He decided that Graceland, that would symbolize a spiritual journey to the home of the rock forefather to revitalize his love for music.
To believe we all will be received in Graceland.
Because his 2 previous studio albums had tanked, Warner Brothers was apathetic about Paul's Graceland. The label executives actually viewed Paul Simon as a really poor investment at that time. They actually thought he was crazy and that the album would go nowhere. Paul, he turned the label's indifference into a positive, though. He believed that it gave him more artistic freedom to do the album exactly how he wanted. When Graceland was released, it was decided that You Can Call Me Out would be the lead single. Maybe the only single. And the single actually stalled at number 44 on the Billboard Hot 100 in September of '86. A lot of people forget that. But while You Can Call Me Out sputtered, Graceland, it steadily grew in sales and critical acclaim through word of mouth. The album was the surprise winner for Album of the Year at the Grammy Awards in February of '87. And it actually led to the comeback of You Can Call Me Out. Now, one of the reasons that You Can Call Me Out stiffed the first time around was because it didn't have the support of MTV. The first video was frankly not good.
He ducked back down the alley with some roly-poly little bat-faced girl.
So when the track began to rejuvenate, Paul worked with his friend Lorne Michaels, the famed producer of Saturday Night Live, to create a new video featuring SNL alumnus and movie star Chevy Chase. Now, the treatment for this new video, directed by Gary Wise, centered around Chevy perfectly lip-syncing Paul's vocals and adding hilarious gestures, facial expressions, and punctuations. The story is that Chevy didn't receive the lyric sheet until just before the car ride to Lorne's studio to shoot the video. Chevy, he was such a fast study. His mimicking, it was uncanny. The dancing choreography between 6'4" Chevy Chase and the 5'3" Paul Simon made it one of the most entertaining and memorable clips of the MTV generation. I think it's the funniest video of the rock era. You Can Call Me Out rebounded to becoming a solid return to pop and AC radio for Paul Simon. Plus, he had his first big hit on music television. The single actually went to number 23 on the Billboard Hot 100, and it went to number 15 on the AC chart. Climbed to number 3 in Canada, and it went to number 4 in the UK, where Paul won the honor for Best International Solo Artist at the 1987 Brit Awards. In South Africa, You Can Call Me Out almost made it to number 1. It peaked at number 2. Meanwhile, Graceland was a phenomenon in South Africa, the epicenter of much controversy for Paul Simon. It was the biggest selling album in that country since Michael Jackson's Thriller. Now, since its release in 1986, Graceland, it's sold more than 17 million copies around the world. It's widely regarded as Paul Simon's greatest work, solo or otherwise. It's exactly what this Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee set out to achieve. Paul Simon took a bold risk, and it paid off. Now, my parents had this album. They played it all the time. I always appreciated You Can Call Me Al, but I was mostly so-so on the full album. It was one I didn't really get until I married my wife. She forced me to really delve in and appreciate its genius. Actually, over the last week, I've listened to it again and gained a greater appreciation for its brilliance from one of America's greatest treasures, Ryman Simon, or Al for short. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Leave us a comment about Paul Simon and this amazing record. What are your thoughts? What are your memories? What are your favorite tracks? What do you think about Art Garfunkel's solo career? Was it the greatest album of 1986? Let's have a great discussion below. If you like our content, we do invite you to subscribe. We would love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.